a journalist on the podcast who is covering a space that is consistently ranked as Vancouver's #1 news beat, and that is real estate. I would like to welcome Howard Chai, freelance real estate journalist, to the podcast. Thank you for being here, Howard. I really appreciate your time. I've been watching you, Howard, online and not in a creepy way, but just kind of, monitoring your activity online and seeing what you're doing. And, stories.com, very popular real estate news website. There was some question there whether or not they were continuing. And instead of seeing you kind of hop into a senior communications role, we instead watched as you started to do some self-publication, followed by what I believe to be a variety of freelance writing, and you really dug your heels in to stay in the journalism space. And I just thought that was really cool because it's a very easy move to say, let's go over to comms and maybe, get a bigger paycheck and not have to worry as much about uncertainty in the journalism world. But then there's a whole other thing with having a passion for what you do. Can you tell us, kind of walk us through when Stories was kind of, there's some uncertainty and the decision you made to kind of really make some decisions to what looked like a strategic game plan to really stay in journalism and pursue it?
Oh, yeah, that's an interesting question. To be honest, there wasn't really much of a game plan, to be honest with you. So when we were informed of it, the employees were informed, I was actually in Taiwan. This was early September, right after Labor Day. So I was in Taiwan since August because I had a family member who was having some medical issues. So I was there in Taiwan helping them with that. And I was still working at the time. But yeah, so my bosses at Stories informed us of what was happening with the company, I was in Taiwan. Yeah. And then after that, it was just, there was it was a bit of a shock to me, but I knew that I wanted to stay in journalism. I knew that a lot of journalists, a lot of them have transitioned into the kind of communications or PR or corporate communication type position, but that was never really a thought that occurred to me. So my plan, there really was no decision. It was kind of always journalism. I was really enrolled in university as a computing science major. And then I chose to switch to communications because we didn't have a journalism program at SFU because I was passionate about it. So I didn't really want to give that up. I didn't really think I needed to give that up. I felt like I was at Stories for about 3 years and I felt like I did a decent job of kind of establishing myself as a real estate reporter. And it felt like it would be a bit of a waste to kind of give that up. Well, obviously without even trying. The game plan was really to just continue what I was doing. And so that's kind of why I originally started the Substack. It was just for me a place to kind of continue writing and to continue keeping up and publishing stories about real estate and what I was covering, just kind of preserving that relationship that I had with my audience. Yeah, so we learned about what I was happening at Stories for September, and then we kind of officially shut down our pause operations at the end of the month. I was still in Taiwan, and so dealing with my family members' medical problems. So after I found out about Stories, there just really wasn't. I was still working, but there wasn't really. I just didn't really have like a need to kind of get back to work. And I thought at least by then my family members' health was kind of improving, but I figured I just kind of actually take a little bit of time off because I never really took any time off during my 3 years at Stories. So I figured I'd actually enjoy Taiwan or where I was born, but I hadn't been back in a while, so I figured I could spend some time with other family and kind of enjoy it. But so that was kind of the plan at first. But then pretty much as soon as Stories kind of shut down, various editors from kind of my former competitors kind of reached out and to inquire about my availability, whether or not they'd be interested in writing for them. And I felt like it was a great opportunity. So I just didn't say no to anybody, and it pretty much ended up not being much of a break for me. And I just started writing for a real estate news exchange and then also Western Investor pretty much almost immediately a couple of weeks after in October. And I didn't think the rest,
So I'm learning slowly about Substack, but I'm sure there are listeners who know little to nothing about it. Can you just briefly kind of run us through Substack and how that platform works and how it supported you and kind of keeping that content flowing?
It's kind of essentially it's a self publishing platform where anybody can write and publish articles and also publish podcasts and videos as well too. It's kind of like Twitter, except more like longer form. I would describe it. I think that's a fair description. It has kind of the similar functionalities where people can follow you and then you kind of keep up with your work, except the work is kind of usually more geared towards long form text and things like that. There's also some various functionality that has kind of a built-in newsletter functionality, which is kind of what drew me to it. I feel like as like tech companies like Google have changed algorithms and kind of changed the way digital media works. Newsletters have been kind of increasingly important to publication. So that was kind of what I felt like the future was headed towards, or not even the future, kind of the now. So that was how drew me to it. And I had already seen many numerous journalists that I admired, particularly some in the United States. They kind of leave kind of these traditional big publication to kind of start their own Substacks, and I found success with their audience. And so I'd been thinking about it in the months before what happened, but so I was just always curious to see like whether or not I could do something similar, and then what I could turn that into, and just on top of just being a place for me to
Well,
continue
it
writing.
worked, and it must have felt quite good to receive those calls from your former competitors. They clearly respected your writing and noticed your skills at stories.com. When you started getting those calls from the other media outlets, was that a surprise to you? How'd that feel?
Yeah, it was definitely very flattering, and I hope you can see like heartwarming. I'm generally like a pretty competitive person, like in terms of like when it comes to like news and work. I do like breaking news, and I have a bit of a competitive drive that kind of keeps me going. I was pretty much at Stories for 3 years, and it was. I think I had a sense, at least people from the industry, that I hear from people who were very complimentary of my work, and I had talked to some other journalists at various other publications, and then they would all had kind words as well. So it wasn't a huge surprise, but it's still like very very flattering that to have the respect of people you were kind of competing with. I think is like yeah, it just it meant a lot to me. So it was
That's awesome.
very cool.
Amazing. Well, real estate, I do minimal freelance writing on PR and communications and some advocacy related topics. And I'm repeatedly told that the most clicked on headlines are the real estate ones. And I'm sure you are aware of that. They are, especially in our market here in BC, and it's fluctuations. It's, we go from sellouts over a weekend to what we're currently experiencing, which is a challenging market for developers and not a lot of sales happening. Tell me a little bit about your background in journalism and how it shifted into real estate specifically.
Mm. Yeah, so like I mentioned, I originally enrolled at SFU as a computing science major. Pretty much kind of early on, I was just struggling a little bit with kind of the course load and also the subject matter. So I ended up taking some writing and communications courses just kind of as a GPA booster essentially, and also just because there were some to fulfill some other course requirements. And I just kind of realized that I really enjoyed it. And that was kind of around 2015, 2016, 2017 when Donald Trump, when his first term was happening, and then there was all the Me Too movement, and I was starting to read a lot of the news, and I just really started to get a sense of like what good journalism can do and the kind of importance of journalism. And at the same time, I was taking the communications courses and writing courses, and I just realized that I really enjoyed writing. I looked forward to it and felt like I was pretty good at it, and it came naturally to me. So those two things intersected, and I just decided to switch over to communications because we didn't have a journalism. And from there, there's kind of a little bit of a gap after I eventually ended up at 604 now, which is a little bit like simplest way to describe the type of station where we covered a bit of news and more like things to do and events around Metro Vancouver. So I was there for a little bit less than a year. I ended up leaving right before COVID, which is kind of I guess perhaps good timing. I remember the last article I wrote for them was BC's second COVID case.
My.
And it felt like a decade ago, but it was not that long ago actually. But yeah, then after that, there was also a bit of a gap where I was just kind of looking for a good journalism job, got a couple of interviews, but never really got any opportunities until around the summer of 2022 when I saw stories, which I didn't really know about before because they were founded in Toronto. Obviously, they were a real estate publication founded in Toronto, I believe in around 2015, if I remember correctly. And if they were looking to, obviously, they're focused mainly on real estate. And after obviously, they kind of established themselves in Toronto and they were looking to establish themselves in Vancouver, which is obviously as you know, the second biggest real estate market in the country. So they were looking for somebody to kind of a full-time person on the ground. So I applied for that job, got that job, and I was at Stories until September 2025, as you know. So I didn't really, to answer your question, I didn't really have a very real estate background. I was just looking for a good journalism job, and I knew I'd always wanted to write about something that was important to people and kind of mattered. Right? Obviously, we live in Vancouver, as you know, like affordability and housing affordability was a huge issue back then. I think it's still a huge issue. It might have probably has even gotten become a bigger issue. So that was kind of what appealed to me about this particular need for a job. And yeah, it just kind of what I've learned from starting a job was that it just touches on so many different things because it's such a big issue. You know, it's a huge election issue. So I end up covering politics quite a decent amount. I cover business and economics, obviously, because it affects the real estate industry and it just kind of keeps it very fresh for me. So obviously, my interest has just grown and grown in real estate since then.
Yeah, it's just for anyone who's not aware, I think most people are, but for many years, about 85% of my clients were a real estate developer and industry related. So I was pitching Howard on a regular basis, hopefully not annoying him too much. But one thing I always appreciated about Howard is that when he wasn't interested in a story or felt it wasn't appropriate for him, he always responded with that, I don't think this one's going to work right now or whatever it may be. And I always say that the best next email from a journalist other than yes is no, because then it helps to us to be better at what we do, provide more valuable content. So I always appreciated receiving those emails from you when you weren't able to or weren't interested at the time in covering the pitch in which I was sending you. So we did some work together during that time. I still do work with developers, just not as many currently in the current market. Has the evolution of the industry surprised you? So, we went from a time when we were seeing, sellouts left and right. And it was very common for a pre-development project to sell out quickly within days to a time when projects are not going ahead. This is, something that some thought would never come and some said would come for sure. There was always this division. Did you expect this? I mean, I know it's not your job to make speculations on the industry, but just being so close, was this a surprise to you, the state in which we're in now in the industry?
A little bit. Obviously, like I said, I didn't really have a real estate background. I wouldn't even say I had a huge interest in real estate before the story jobs, to be honest with you. But obviously, I was kind of aware that it's kind of a huge industry for British Columbia, and there's this everybody. I think that is kind of a fundamental belief was to have anywhere really. But when I saw that stories in kind of fall 2022, that was kind of when things. It was kind of when things actually started getting kind of started turning. That was kind of when interest rates kind of were rising again. Things actually just kind of got from there. So I think we haven't really been so great in during the boom times. You're seeing this has been interesting talking to people in the industry who've been working in this for decades and hearing about the historical context of how like many people have told me this is kind of the worst racing market they've ever been involved in. Definitely interesting. So from that perspective, it has been interesting to see. But I think we're kind of getting close to perhaps rock bottom, at least from people that have told me. And obviously from there, then things can start getting better, which I think will also be interesting for me too. After just spending 3 years writing about things that are like things just on the downturn.
Yeah, it's definitely, I mean, we just moved rental homes and just even the way it's affected rental prices has been quite shocking to see the the, the decrease in rental prices.
Yeah.
Obviously nice for us, but we don't own a home, but definitely some changes. There's a lot of controversy, a lot of division around housing, as you say, around affordability, lack of affordability. This being, many professionals will be full-time, long-time, or maybe forever renters in the Vancouver market. How do you manage it Howard, and I struggled this. I studied journalism and switched over into communications. But how do you manage an angle when there is a lot of controversy and division? And you're a human being, clearly, you have your own feelings about something, but how do you manage to keep that out of the story and to kind of keep things balanced when you're approaching a really controversial angle or piece for an outlet?
I kind of view journalism through this kind of classical traditional lens where I feel like it's not necessarily my job to tell people how to feel. I feel like my job is really to kind of, look at the facts and kind of help people digest the information so that they can kind of reach a decision or a conclusion or opinion kind of on their own. So that's kind of how I approach a lot of the stories that I write. Sometimes it's easier, sometimes it's not. Like if I'm writing about a development project, it's pretty easy to just say, hey, this developer is proposing this at this particular site and they're proposing this amount of units with these kind of amenities and things like that. And sometimes I also write out like commercial real estate transactions where it's just simply, this person is selling that property to another person. So those are obviously much easier to be objective about them. So sometimes the ones that are, and then when there's like a harder topic, I've written quite a few like articles about real estate insolvency. So for those, obviously, I like to kind of stick to that. A lot of those cases are usually based on court documents, so that makes it a bit easier. And yeah, I just try to keep it to the facts and what's actually there in terms of, and not leaving much room for me to kind of inject kind of my personal perspective or views or even much analysis. For a while, I just didn't even really try to do much analysis, just kind of presented the facts and she just let them sit and let them kind of speak for themselves and let people kind of adjust it in however
Yeah,
way
I
they
mean, I
can.
think that's a lot harder than people realize. You describe it in a perfect way, as a journalist should write a piece or report on a piece. But as humans with feelings, emotions, and opinions, it's not easy to write pieces. And you're interviewing sources. You're hearing different perspectives. Some of them may be emotional. So it's to be a journalist that writes balanced, clear pieces as Howard does. I don't know that the average person realizes the skill and the level of discipline that goes into presenting a balanced piece, as you say, that just offers the facts. Because I can tell you, every bone in my body, the reason I'm not a journalist is that I want to go in there with my feelings about everything. So I would get a failure on that one. You must get a large variety of emails, I imagine, especially when the market is busy and there's a lot going on. What grabs your attention, Howard, when you open that inbox in the morning and you see all those emails with story ideas from anyone from PR pros to, industry professionals to, from anyone? What really kind of pings your interest when it comes to sifting through there and deciding which ones you're going to pursue?
I would say I'm generally pretty open-minded about just like it. I always kind of read everybody's pitches, even though I do get a decent amount of pitches. I always like to. It's just I may not necessarily do anything with the pitches, as you kind of alluded to earlier, but I do like to kind of at least be aware of what's happening. And I think what kind of made it kind of interesting or perhaps a little bit different for me personally is that because when I was at Storage, we were kind of a smaller team already. And obviously I was still kind of the only person covering BC full time. So I had to be like very selective about what I could cover and what I could cover. So in terms of receiving emails and pitches of like, I kind of when people are pitching, like they also kind of pitching competitors, like other people that cover real estate. So I would oftentimes like, I don't oftentimes when I knew that to be the case, like I would oftentimes not necessarily choose to cover that because I feel like if the CBC, for example, is going to cover the same pitch, they're going to most likely kind of drown out my story anyway. So it wouldn't really be worth it for me to cover it unless I felt like there was a way that I could cover it in a different way or a better way, or perhaps do something that with kind of a more real estate focus that perhaps other publications or journalists couldn't really do the same way. So that's kind of how I approached kind of discerning and kind of reading the different PR pitches and whether or not to pursue a story. That was kind of the biggest factor. It still really is the biggest factor for me because just kind of in terms of being selective about like what PR pitches to kind of continue with or not. But yeah, just like whether or not I think the goal for me is always to have unique stories that like perhaps that I can do a bit more differently than others can. So if I see a pitch that where I think, oh, that's, I don't necessarily do something with it immediately, but I'll kind of file it away in the back of my head, and then when I have like an idea, maybe I'll kind of revisit that and then figure a way to kind of take a more unique spin on it for my
Do you
particular audience.
appreciate and respond well? I don't think I've ever worked with you on an exclusive, but do you appreciate exclusives, Howard? Just for those who aren't aware, an exclusive is when a company or a PR professional offers a journalist an exclusive, so they are the only journalist that will have first access to that story information to report on, and then other media can report on it afterwards, but they basically get first and only dibs on that story news. So do you appreciate exclusives, and do you look for them?
Sure. Yeah, I love exclusives. I'm kind of competitive, so I do like breaking news and ready and kind of getting to things before other publications can. And just kind of personally, but also just professionally, like it helps kind of draw eyeballs to those particular stories. Definitely always appreciate it, but there hasn't really. It still kind of depends on whether or not I think it's suitable for whatever audience I'm writing for. Yeah, definitely
Okay,
exclusive.
I'll have to keep that in
Always
mind
welcome.
next time I've got a good one. I promise you it will be a good one if I can find a good one in the near future. So you've been covering real estate now. So stories.com is back on the grid, correct? Okay. Are you writing with them?
Yeah. Yeah. Also, they were acquired by BC-based Site Media in January or maybe December. They kind of around during the holidays. So they were kind of brought back to life. So I'm back
Okay. So you're
freelancing with
sticking to the
them as well.
freelancing and writing for a variety of publications.
Yeah, I did kind of consider, looking for a full-time job again, a staff position. That feels to me to be more kind of I guess stable, perhaps. But I know I started writing for the Tidy as well a little bit, and also Stories is back now, and also more recently started writing for the Globe and Mail. So like I don't really have a shortage of work, of freelance work, which is nice, and it kind of keeps things kind of allows me to kind of continue what I'm doing, and I don't necessarily see it to have a reason for me to go back to a full-time job unless a great opportunity arises. And also just with Substack, it's kind of another place where I can write in. And yeah, I kind of enjoy the kind of change of pace. I'm still working a lot, but I do have a lot more freedom than I did back then in terms of just managing my own time and schedule and workflow and all that. So it's been a change of pace. I'm enjoying it.
Congratulations
No
on the
complaints.
Globe and Mail. The most recent Globe and Mail feature I saw of yours, a multi-page feature that you wrote. That must feel pretty good. Globe and Mail being the national respected publication that it was. Was that quite nice being able to see that out in print and kind of having it in your hands?
It was definitely very cool. I think as a journalist, you always want to write for the kind of you always have your eye on kind of the kind of top publications in your country or province or wherever you live. And obviously for Canada, it's really the Globe and Mail placed in my eyes. So that was very, very exciting. It's still it has kind of settled in, but it hasn't really settled in at the same time. It's kind of cool and kind of surreal to think what it was kind of always a goal for me, but it wasn't really kind of like I always felt like it was good enough. It could do it eventually, but I guess it's happened a bit faster than I kind of assumed or thought it could happen. So it's been a great ride, and I'm hoping to continue contributing freelance stories for them for hopefully
Amazing.
for a long time.
That's fantastic. Howard, I wanted to ask you a question that it kind of gets you thinking of the ups and the downs a little bit, but what would you say is one of the biggest challenges about your work as a journalist reporter? And then on the flip side, what would you say you enjoy the most about the work that you do covering the journalism beat here in British Columbia?
I think the challenge for me is it's I'd be surprised, but there really is just like too many things for me to keep up with. It's like it's like you mentioned, like real estate is a really huge topic, but it's also a little bit niche. Like I cover a little bit of housing planning, planning policy, and also commercial real estate. And some aspects of those are a bit more niche, so that there's not really necessarily too much competition in terms of other publications or other reporters kind of copy also covering those particular. Some do, but they're not necessarily full time or cover it kind of via a different kind of perspective than I do. So there's always a lot of stories for me to keep up with, and since even when I was at the stories and more so after I started freelancing, I also have started covering more Alberta and also Ontario news a bit. So there's just like so much things for me to keep up with. Like I'm just kind of a curious person in general. So when I spot something that's interesting, I'll kind of like, look into it and do my research and trying to see what I can do with it. And yeah, so that's really the biggest challenge for me, just kind of keeping up with all these different kind of threads that I want to look into and really not having enough time in a particular day or a week to kind of get all the stories that I want to. So that's definitely, I would say, the biggest challenge for me, which is also, to answer your second part of your question, it's also something I love about it is just like it always keeps me busy and it's so broad, at least the way that I kind of approach it. Some days I'm covering, like right now, I'm kind of starting to gear towards covering the municipal and what in housing policies and all that. But other days I could just be covering a development project and seeing what's happening in this particular neighborhood. Another day I could just be, looking at court documents all day. Another day I could be looking at various market reports and getting a sense of what's happening in commercial real estate. So it kind of really keeps it fresh. And sometimes, some days I'm in a rush to kind of break news. Other days I'm taking more time to kind of write a more thoughtful and longer article about a particular subject. So like kind of, all the days are kind of different and interesting and there's different faces and feels. So it's definitely something that I love about it.
Yeah, it's kind of you're right. It is it's kind of a bit of professional FOMO, right? You're away from the space for a few
For
minutes
sure.
and all of a sudden there's been, a million shifts.
Yeah, there's been a few moments where I'd be like out meeting somebody or attending an event, and then I'd check my email for a second and see some other publication break some news, and it's like it's a little bit
I didn't
traumatizing
realize you had
sometimes.
that competitive edge. Okay, well, we're gonna have to I'm gonna have to think about some exclusives to find for you. Dig away, but I think that's probably the part of the reason that fed into your success when Stories was heading for closure, right? You have the drive or you don't, right? For the craft. I just wanted to ask you a question based on covering the real estate beat for several years. So I'm a small business owner. I make a healthy income, but I have a family of five. I may never buy in Vancouver. I owned a condo as a single professional, but a family home for us would be doable, but it would be really challenging financially. It would basically make the rest of our lives pretty unenjoyable. Do you see changing in our market for the professional family? And I had Minister Callan on the podcast a couple of times when he was housing minister, and I believe I asked him something similar. But there's kind of this, they say the missing middle. I don't know if it is the middle income, but the professional family that can't afford the 1.5 or $2 million home, will they ever, do you think, be able to purchase like in some form of comfortable nature in BC? Or do you think BC is just a market that's just always going to be somewhat out of reach for many?
Yeah, that's definitely an important question. I mean, I'm kind of in the same boat that you described. I'm 31. I'm like a younger millennial in that boat. I'm currently a renter, and I'm one of those people who have contemplated the question of whether or not I be able to buy a home, like a home or condo or townhouse. But to answer your question, I was recently talking to Frances Pila, who I'm sure you know is also a reporter. The same now, she was running for Vancouver City Council. And she kind of touched on a point that I kind of felt like I agreed with, and I think was a good way to answer your question, which is that, as you know, like rents and prices have kind of been coming down in recent months, and because there's been more housing supply coming to the market, and the market is kind of taking a bit of a downturn, which so in terms of prices, that's good. But I think it would be unrealistic and I don't think anybody really expects the prices to kind of go back to, I don't know, prices from like a decade ago or 2 decades ago. But what Francis was saying was that, maybe all of the families that need a single family home, maybe not all of them will be able to get a single family home, but perhaps they'll be able to get a townhouse at a not too crazy price. And I think that would be an achievable. I think from that perspective as that, I think that could be achievable, to be optimistic. Maybe not every family will be able to get a large single family home, but it could be able to get a townhouse or a duplex where they can kind of fulfill their needs as well and kind of get close. And maybe one day eventually things will change or their financial situation change and they'll be able to move up the housing
Hmm.
ladder and get a single family home. And I think that's kind of how I kind of view, or at least perhaps wishful thinking for myself. But I think perhaps I think
Yeah,
that's
and
cool.
I think that's one of the things, a real estate client was telling me the other day, there's so many elements I think that the general population aren't aware of, the CICs and, one of former client was describing how they had to pay the municipality in which they were building $150,000 per home to the municipality. And I just couldn't believe it. I mean, developers are not currently my bread and butter when it comes to my clients, but they have typically been. So I have learned a lot about them. And there are a lot of payments that developers have to make behind the scenes that make things a lot less affordable. I'm not saying they don't make a healthy income and that, but they do pay in many ways. It's this very interesting thing where I think we all want to kind of throw the blame somewhere. So we tend to, as a general population, throw it at the developer, it seems, but I don't know that it's really a blame game as much as it is, like you say, the nature of development and real estate in a province like BC. You're right. What would you like to see for your future in journalism, Howard? Any plans or dreams that you would like to share or that you would like to kind of see in the years to come when it comes to your work in the space?
Well, goal of mine just really just to continue doing what I've been doing and hopefully continue writing important stories. And like I just said, I was hoping one day that I'd be able to write some stories for the Golden Mill. That's happened. So that's been really cool. I think one kind of more specific goals along those lines was to write something for a magazine like a McLean's or Walrus or that type of long feature. I think that would be cool to see. And that's always been. I've always liked magazines, kind of growing up reading magazines, not necessarily kind of news magazines, but I was more of a sports magazine person. But being more into news nowadays, I think that would be cool and is kind of a goal or I feel like to check off at some point in my career. But yeah, and just in general, I just hope that I could kind of continue covering these or what I believe to be one of the most important topics in Canada, really. And like to think that I think there's also ways for me to continue improving that. So I hope to continue doing that and also just covering this particular beat the best I can and writing important stories that people care about and are important to people and where people can
Amazing.
find value. And also just growing my Substack and see what I can turn that
Yes,
into.
you've inspired me on the Substack side of things. I started an account and I didn't do much with it, and then I saw where yours went, and I thought, wow, I gotta look back into Substack. Thank you for that.
Easy.
Yeah, no, it's
After that, also
interesting. I mean, the self-publication is not new, but that format is certainly the longer form is definitely different. Yeah, it's interesting. This topic is interesting, Howard. There's one question that I forgot to ask, and I always ask journalists this when I have them on the podcast, given the fact that I'm a PR person. Any pet peeves from communicators, PR people, or anyone pitching you? To be honest with you, they're helpful because you'll get fewer people doing them, sending this type of information or doing it in that format, and also helps people to kind of improve on how they're doing their work. A young up and coming PR person, I blush at the thought of types of pitches I used to send. Any pet peeve that really you continually are seeing or that bothers you that you could give the communicators or marketers in the world a tip on?
Not really, to be honest. It's more, I do have a pet peeve, but I wouldn't say it's specific to PR people. It's just like, it just kind of is a pet peeve of mine when people kind of, you're talking about them and talking to them about something in one particular email thread. And then for some reason, like you're talking about the same thing, but they start in a different email thread. And then now you have two different email threads kind of about the same thing. Or it's like, that's kind of a pet peeve. I'm one of those people who I like to keep my email inbox at a nice and tidy
Oh,
zero. So like, it's just, and having and I do keep a lot of the emails, so it becomes harder to track when there's a lot of threads. But that's not specific to any PR people. Like non-PR people do that sometimes too. But I see the reason sometimes, but that
okay.
is kind of a pet peeve for me sometimes. It's just more of a
So you
general
don't
email
get
pet peeve. So
a lot of pitches, that are relevant to you, kind of like, do you want to write about this new home development in New Brunswick? A lot of Vancouver writers say they get, a lot of irrelevant pitches.
yeah, I mean, I definitely do. I wouldn't necessarily call that a pet peeve though. Like I don't necessarily mind just taking a minute to read the
Hmm.
pitch and seeing what's the kind of main thing I look at pitches is like who they're making kind of available for interviews. I mean, I just kind of like talking to a wide assortment of people, particularly people in the industry. So sometimes, I may not necessarily cover the story the way that they've pitched it to me, but I'll, keep the person or developer or company in mind. And maybe I'll think about them. Maybe I'll think of them later on for a different story and find an opportunity to talk to them. So it's a lot of times what I take away from pitches and why, as you said, like GZ will respond to people even if I'm not interested. Because I understand people like who work in PR. Probably I imagine you guys are probably sending off a lot of emails and not hearing back, and could be potentially demoralizing, or perhaps and I just also like the people I didn't had actually respond to people that acknowledge, and it also helps for me, like I mentioned, maybe they don't fully recognize or understand like what it is, whether or not something is a topic that I would cover. So I also do understand that they want feedback, and it's just to help also kind of shape the pitches better. So that's a big reason why I always try to
Yes, no,
reply
that is
to a
very
reader.
true. A wonderful journalist to work with. Clearly, a professional that is admired by not only PR professionals, but by the industry itself. Howard Chai, freelance journalist, writing on the real estate beat in one of the hottest real estate markets in the world. So he is a busy man and currently is writing for a variety of outlets, including Renex, Western Investor, Globe and Mail, TAI. It's fantastic to have you today, Howard, and thank you so much for taking the time to share your story and expertise, and just a real pleasure chatting. Thank you so much.
Likewise, Rachel, it's great to talk to you. Be kind and truly connect. You're listening to Rachel
Perfect.
Sexton Connects.